Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Robert Adams, and joining us today from the Australian Army is Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Johnson. We welcome the veterans who have served, those who are still serving, and the families that love and support them. The live stream of this ceremony is made possible by the Returned and Services League of Australia and the RSL and Services Clubs Association. We welcome members who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the pool of reflection by visitors to the memorial and students on behalf of Our Lady of Grace School from Glengarry, South Australia. If you are able, I now invite you to please stand and join in singing the national anthem. Students and those requiring a seat, please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight we'll read the story behind just one of those on the memorial's roll of honour, which lists the names of more than 103,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations over more than a century. But first we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Private William Hamilton Nicoll. William Nicoll, known as Will, or sometimes Bill or Nick, was born on the 5th of September 1881 to John and Elizabeth Nicoll of Dundee, Scotland. He was educated at the Morgan Academy in Dundee and went on to work as a stationer's assistant. Not long after the end of the Boer War in 1902, Nicoll saw an opportunity and emigrated to South Africa, where he continued working in the stationery business. From South Africa, he came to Australia, settling in Perth, Western Australia, at the age of 24. Nicoll first went into stationery in Australia as well, looking for firms in Fremantle and Perth before moving into journalism. Along with these articles, he had a regular column in the Perth Truth called Port Pickings, about happenings in Fremantle. He was also a member of the Fremantle soccer team, and it was said that despite his eccentricities, the game was rarely had a more popular exponent. Nick was a great enthusiast and a real good fellow. William Nicoll enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force within weeks of the outbreak of war in 1914. He underwent a period of training in Australia before leaving for active service overseas with the 12th Battalion on the 31st of October 1914. The 12th Battalion arrived in Egypt in early December and continued training in the desert for several weeks. In early April 1915, the 12th Battalion began to prepare for an attack on the Gallipoli Peninsula. The battalion was part of the covering force that landed in the early hours of the 25th of April, the men being distributed among the other battalion forces in the 3rd Infantry Brigade as they rowed ashore. Coming under heavy fire as they landed, the 12th Battalion suffered heavy casualties. Private Nicoll was among the men who forced their way to the heights above the beach, eventually falling back a short way to form a defensive line. Over the following days, the Anzac worked hard to establish a perimeter, the 12th taking part in feverish activity and working to reorganise. On the 2nd of May, the battalion was brought back to the beach for a rest. Private Will Nicoll never made it back to the beach. At some point before retirement, he was in the front line coming under sniper fire. The men on either side of him were shot, and Private Nicoll moved into the gap to take their place. Almost immediately, he was shot as well, and fell at the feet of a mate from Fremantle named Davidson. Nicoll was able to ask Davidson to write his brother in Western Australia and his parents in Scotland to tell them what had happened, and even getting Davidson to sign his will as he lay in the trench. Not long afterwards, he died. Davidson fulfilled his promise and wrote to Will's brother, who later said, "Now that I know he survived the landing and had some fighting, I have visions of his having had all sorts of exciting experiences. In spite of his pain, he was able to think of us and dictate a last message. It was splendid. A splendid way of going, don't you think?" Will Nicoll was greatly missed in Western Australia. A self-described press pal wrote, "I can see Nick's broad, high-boned Scotch face grinning at me. He never had an unhappy moment. He took his full fling of goodness of the things in the world, and he never had a bad word to say of anyone. He went to war for the fun of it, and I'm sure he died for the fun of it. Yes, and I'll bet he did something brave before he died." This morning, the three of us went over to the same bar at Fremantle that he used to patronise in the days before the war. We silently raised our glass and drank in his memory. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. I'm sure Nick would be pleased if he knew. So long, Nick. An enlarged photograph of Will Nicoll was hung in the Press Club in Perth in his memory. The inscription included those words that were considered touching yet deeply significant. So long, Nick. It was reported that no one who knew the late pressman personally could bear look upon the photo. It brings a lump to the throat. Will Nicoll's grave, if he had one, was lost in later fighting on the Gallipoli Peninsula, and today he's commemorated on the Lone Pine Memorial. He was 33 years old. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my right among almost 62,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. His photograph is displayed today by the Pool of Reflection. This is but one of many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Private William Hamilton Nicoll, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
For those who are able, I now invite you to please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Poziere or in the low scrub of Gallipoli with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain has thought in his last moment, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. On behalf of the director, staff and volunteers, we thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial today and for your continued support during the memorial's development project. We wish you all a very pleasant evening.